What if I told you a 17-year-old kid from Iowa built an engine for $65 that humiliated Chevrolet's most expensive muscle cars? Not with some exotic race motor or secret factory parts, with a junkyard small block and fuel injection nobody wanted. This teenager's backyard build achieved power density that Chevy's own engineers said was impossible, matching the output of engines twice its size while revving to speeds that would grenade a big block. The year was 1962, and Don Nicholson was about to turn the automotive world upside down. Then picture this. It's a Saturday night at the Cordova Dragway in Iowa. The staging lanes are packed with Impalas sporting Chevy's legendary 409 big block, the same engine the Beach Boys would immortalize in song. These massive 409 cubic inch monsters were the undisputed kings of the quarter mile, churning out 409 horsepower with dual quads and solid lifters. Their owners had spent thousands on these boulevard bruisers, confident in their superiority. Then a primer gray Chevy 2 rolls up to the line. Under its hood sits an engine half the size, a 283 small block that most racers wouldn't even bother with. The big block guys are laughing. They're about to stop. This is the story of how Don Nicholson, a teenage mechanic from small-town Iowa, discovered a combination that Chevrolet's best engineers had overlooked. How he built a 283 cubic inch small block that produced the same horsepower as Chevy's flagship 409, but with half the displacement and a 20th of the cost. And how this $65 junkyard build launched one of drag racing's most legendary careers. And yet, to understand the magnitude of what Nicholson achieved, we need to travel back to 1962's automotive landscape. The horsepower wars were in full swing. Pontiac had just released the 421 Super Duty. Ford was campaigning its thunderous 427. And Chevrolet? They were betting everything on displacement. The 409 was their crown jewel, a massive big block designed for one purpose: domination. With its distinctive W-series cylinder heads, the 409 featured staggered valves and unique combustion chambers that looked nothing like conventional Chevy heads. The top-spec version, with dual Carter AFB 4-barrels and 11.25.1 compression, produced 409 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 420 lb-ft of torque. It was expensive, exclusive, and seemingly unbeatable. Meanwhile, the 283 small block was Chevrolet's economy performance engine. Introduced in 1957, it powered everything from station wagons to Corvettes. In its hottest factory form with fuel injection, it made 315 horsepower, respectable but nowhere near big block territory. Most hot rodders considered the 283 a starting point, something you'd bore, and stroke into a 301 or 327. The idea that a 283 could match a 409's output, that was fantasy. The math simply didn't work. Or so everyone thought. And the problem facing young racers in 1962 was simple. Speed cost money. A complete 409 engine would set you back over $1,000. That's nearly $10,000 in today's money. Add installation, transmission upgrades, and rear-end modifications, and you were looking at the price of a new car. For a 17-year-old mechanic making maybe $2 an hour, a 409 might as well have been a Ferrari engine. But Don Nicholson had something more valuable than money. He had an understanding of physics that most hot rodders missed. Here's where the story gets interesting. Nicholson worked at a Chevy dealership in Burlington, Iowa, spending his days rebuilding engines and his evenings studying every technical manual he could find. He noticed something peculiar about Chevrolet's fuel injection system. Introduced in 1957 for the Corvette, Rochester fuel injection was a mechanical marvel that everyone hated. It was complex, temperamental, and expensive. By 1962, most were being yanked off Corvettes and replaced with carburetors. Dealers couldn't give the units away. But Nicholson saw what others missed. Fuel injection's precise metering could support compression ratios that would destroy a carbureted engine. The foundation of Nicholson's build was a 283 block he pulled from a wrecked 1958 Impala at a local junkyard. Cost $35. The block was nothing special. Standard bore, stock stroke, factory main caps. But it was solid, and that's all Nicholson needed. The magic would happen in the top end. He discovered a Rochester fuel injection unit that had been removed from a 1960 Corvette. The owner practically gave it away for $30, happy to be rid of the Maur's unreliable junk. For $65 total, Nicholson had the core of his David-versus-Goliath build. But here's where Nicholson's genius truly emerged. Instead of following conventional hot rod wisdom, bigger carbs, wilder cams, more compression, he approached the build like an engineer. He calculated that fuel injection's superior atomization would allow him to run 11.1 compression on pump gas, something that would cause severe detonation with carburetors. He could rev higher because fuel injection maintained perfect mixture at any RPM, and he could run a more radical camshaft because fuel injection didn't rely on intake vacuum for fuel delivery. The build started with blueprinting. Nicholson balanced every rotating component to within half a gram. He CC'd each combustion chamber and matched them perfectly. He port-matched the intake manifold to the heads, spending dozens of hours with a die grinder, ensuring smooth airflow. The stock 283 heads received larger valves, 1.94-inch intakes, and 1.50-inch exhausts from a 3N27, and a 3-angle valve job that was practically unheard of in 1962 Iowa. He calculated port velocity at different RPMs and modified the short turn radius to maintain swirl at high engine speeds. The compression ratio hit exactly 11.1, achieved through zero-deck pistons and 58 cc combustion chambers. This was knife-edge territory for pump gas, but fuel injection's precise metering made it possible. The camshaft was a custom grind from Iski with 292 degrees of advertised duration, 495 inches of lift, and a 108-degree lobe separation angle. These specs were radical for 1962. Most street cams had maybe 270 degrees duration and .450 lift. This cam wouldn't even idle properly with a carburetor. But with fuel injection maintaining stoichiometric ratio regardless of vacuum, it purred like a kitten. Let me put these specifications in perspective. The 283 displaced 283 cubic inches, tiny by muscle car standards. The 409 had 126 more cubic inches, or 44% more displacement. In racing, there's a saying, there's no replacement for displacement, except Nicholson was about to prove there was: superior breathing, higher RPM capability, and perfect fuel metering. His little 283 would rev to 7,500 RPM reliably, a speed that would scatter a 409 across the track. At those engine speeds, the 283 was moving more air per minute than the larger engine could at 6,000 RPM. The fuel injection system itself required extensive modification. The stock Corvette unit was designed for 283 cubic inches, but not 283 cubic inches, breathing like a race engine. Nicholson recalibrated the fuel meter by changing the pill sizes in the nozzles. He advanced the injection timing by modifying the pump drive. He increased fuel pressure from 18 psi to 22 psi by shimming the relief valve. Every change was calculated, tested, adjusted, and tested again. He spent 3 months perfecting the fuel curve, using spark plug readings and exhaust temperature to guide his modifications. Now here's something that even experienced engineers might not know. The Rochester fuel injection system used a unique air meter that measured incoming air velocity and adjusted fuel delivery mechanically through a series of bell cranks and levers. No electronics, no computers, just brilliant mechanical engineering. Nicholson discovered that by changing the ratio of these bell cranks, he could alter the fuel curve to match his radical camshaft's characteristics. He essentially reprogrammed a mechanical computer using nothing but hand tools and mathematics. The exhaust system was equally critical. Nicholson fabricated headers with 1 5/8-inch primary tubes, each exactly 32 inches long. The collector design was revolutionary for its time, a merge collector that maintained exhaust velocity while reducing back pressure. He calculated the primary tube length using formulas from aircraft engine manuals, tuning for peak power at 7,000 RPM. The entire exhaust system was ceramic-coated inside, a process Nicholson learned from studying turbine engines. This reduced heat transfer and maintained exhaust velocity, critical for a small displacement engine. The ignition system received similar attention. Nicholson recurved the distributor to bring in full advance at 3,000 RPM instead of the stock 4,500. He installed heavier valve springs rated for 8,000 RPM and had the valve train geometry corrected to prevent side loading at high engine speeds. Every pushrod was checked for straightness and length. The rocker arms were magnafluxed for cracks and ratio checked to ensure consistent lift. This attention to detail meant the engine could safely rev 1,500 RPM higher than any 283 Chevrolet had ever built. Fin-end testing began in spring 1962. Nicholson didn't have access to a dynamometer, so he used the oldest test bed available, the drag strip. His test mule was a stripped 1962 Chevy 2 that weighed 2,140 pounds with driver. The first pass was conservative, shifting at 6,500 RPM. The car ran 13.20 seconds at 103 mph. Promising, but not world-beating. Nicholson raised the shift point to 7,000 RPM. The time dropped to 12.5 at 107 mph. The little 283 was singing a song no small block had sung before. But the real test would come against the 409 Impalas that dominated Iowa drag racing. These were serious machines, super stock legal builds, making advertised power with thousands of dollars in modifications. Their owners were experienced racers who knew every trick. They'd seen plenty of small block heroes come and go. Nicholson's first match race was against Larry Morrison's 1962 Impala SS409. Morrison's car was a known quantity, consistent 1260s at 108 mph. The smart money was on the big block .8 The race became legend in Iowa drag racing circles. Morrison's Impala launched hard, the 409's massive torque putting him out front by a car length. But as both cars shifted into second, something unexpected happened. The gray Chevy 2 began reeling in the Impala. By the time they crossed the 8th-mile mark, they were dead even. Through the lights, Nicholson's 283-powered Chevy 2 edged out the 409 by half a fender. The scoreboard told the story, 12:42 seconds at 109 mph for Nicholson, 12:58 at 108 mph for Morrison. The crowd was stunned. How did a 283 just outrun a 409? N-word spread quickly through the Midwest racing community. This kid from Iowa had built something special. Racers started showing up from Illinois, Missouri, and Wisconsin to see if the stories were true. Nicholson ran them all, and the little 283 kept winning. Not every race, but enough to prove this wasn't luck. The engine made power where big blocks couldn't, above 6,500 RPM. It weighed 150 pounds less than a 409, improving weight distribution, and it was consistent, running within 1/100th of a second on every pass. The technical advantage went deeper than just horsepower. The 283's shorter stroke meant less piston speed at high RPM, reducing stress on the connecting rods. The smaller bore meant better mixture motion in the combustion chamber, improving burn efficiency. The lighter rotating assembly meant the engine could accelerate faster through the gears. Every advantage was small, but they added up to something revolutionary, a small block that could run with the big boys. Let's examine the specific power output, because this is where Nicholson's build truly shattered conventions. Dyno testing would later confirm the engine produced 350 horsepower at 7,200 RPM. From 283 cubic inches, that's 1.24 horsepower per cubic inch. Extraordinary for 1962. The 409 made 1.0 horsepower per cubic inch. The vaunted 327 fuel-injected Corvette engine made 1.13. Nicholson's Junkyard 283 had achieved the highest specific output of any production-based Chevrolet engine, and he'd done it for $65 in core components. Think about that for a second. Chevrolet's engineers, with unlimited budgets and the best facilities in Detroit, designed the 283 to make 315 horsepower maximum. They never imagined someone could extract 350 horsepower reliably. They certainly never thought it could match their flagship 409. But a teenage mechanic in Iowa, working in a garage behind his parents' house, had outsmarted them all. Not through luck or accident, but through careful calculation and understanding of the physics involved. The secret was synergy. Every modification Nicholson made enhanced the others. The high compression worked because of fuel injection. The radical cam worked because of the high compression. The high RPM capability worked because of the careful balancing and valve train preparation. Remove any element, and the package fell apart. It was a perfectly orchestrated combination that nobody else had discovered because nobody else had looked at the problem the right way. Now, when Chevrolet's reaction was fascinating. Engineers from the Tonawanda engine plant actually traveled to Iowa to inspect Nicholson's engine. They couldn't believe a kid had achieved what their calculations said was impossible. After examining the build and verifying its output, they offered Nicholson a job on the spot. He turned them down, choosing instead to open his own performance shop. But Chevrolet learned from his innovations. The techniques Nicholson pioneered, high compression with fuel injection, radical cam timing, high RPM operation, would influence the development of the legendary L84 327 and later the L88 427. The immediate impact on drag racing was seismic. Within months, racers across the country were building high-compression, fuel-injected small blocks. The price of used Rochester units skyrocketed from $30 to $300. Cam grinders started offering profiles specifically designed for fuel injection. The idea that there's no replacement for displacement was suddenly questionable. If a 283 could make 350 horsepower, what could a 327 do? What about a 350? But here's what most people don't realize about this story. Nicholson's real innovation wasn't the engine itself, it was the approach. He proved that intelligent engineering could overcome brute force, that understanding the science mattered more than following conventional wisdom, that a kid with curiosity and determination could outsmart the biggest corporation in America. This philosophy would define his entire career as he became Dino Don, one of drag racing's most successful and innovative competitors. And the long-term influence of Nicholson's 283 build extends far beyond drag racing. It demonstrated that specific output, horsepower per cubic inch, was a valid metric of engine efficiency. It proved that fuel injection, despite its complexity, offered performance advantages that carburetors couldn't match. It showed that high RPM operation was viable for street engines with proper preparation. These lessons would influence engine development for decades, leading to the high specific output engines we take for granted today. Consider modern context. Today's Corvette LT6 engine makes 670 horsepower from 5.5 liters. That's 2.0 horsepower per cubic inch. Impressive, but it required dual overhead cams, titanium connecting rods, and decades of computer modeling. Nicholson achieved 1.24 horsepower per cubic inch in 1962 with pushrod technology and slide rule calculations. Adjusted for technological advancement, his achievement might be even more impressive than modern supercars' engines. The 283 build also highlighted a generational shift in hot rodding. The old guard relied on cubic inches and brute force. The new generation, represented by Nicholson, applied scientific principles and precise measurement. This transition would accelerate through the 1960s, leading to the professional racing we know today. But in 1962, it was revolutionary. A kid with a high school education was out-engineering Detroit's finest revolutionized. The financial implications were equally revolutionary. Nicholson proved you didn't need thousands of dollars to go fast. With careful selection of components and intelligent modification, a budget build could compete with unlimited dollar efforts. This democratization of speed inspired countless young racers who previously thought competitive racing was beyond their reach. The message was clear. Brains could beat bucks. Nicholson's specific modifications became a template for small block builders everywhere. The 11:1 compression ratio became standard for serious street engines. The 292-degree camshaft became a popular grind. The header dimensions he calculated were copied endlessly. Even today, engine builders follow principles Nicholson established in that Iowa garage. He didn't just build a fast engine, he created a formula that others could replicate and improve upon. The cultural impact reached beyond racing. Nicholson's success inspired a generation of engineers and mechanics to question authority and think independently. If a teenager could outsmart Chevrolet, what else was possible? This spirit of innovation and skepticism toward conventional wisdom became a hallmark of American hot rodding. It encouraged experimentation, rewarded creativity, and celebrated the underdog who could beat the establishment through superior thinking. Let's talk about the human element of this story. Don Nicholson wasn't some privileged kid with factory connections or family money. His father was a factory worker, his mother a seamstress. He learned mechanics by necessity, fixing farm equipment to earn money. His education came from library books and trial and error. When he needed a tool he couldn't afford, he made it. When he needed knowledge he didn't have, he found it. This self-reliance and determination resonated with working-class Americans who saw themselves in his story. The technical legacy of the 283 build appears in unexpected places. NASA engineers studying high-performance engines in the 1960s cited Nicholson's work on mixture motion and combustion efficiency. The military investigated his cooling system modifications for aircraft engines. Even Formula One teams studied his approach to valve train stability at high RPM. A teenager's drag racing project had implications for aerospace and international motorsports. But perhaps the most important lesson from Nicholson's 283 build isn't technical at all. It's about perspective. Everyone else saw the 283 as a limited entry-level engine. Nicholson saw potential. Everyone else accepted that big blocks were superior. Nicholson questioned why. Everyone else followed the established path. Nicholson forged his own. This ability to see beyond conventional limitations, to imagine what could be, rather than accepting what is, that's the real genius of his story. The story takes an interesting turn in late 1962. Word of Nicholson's success reached Bill Jenkins, the legendary engine builder known as Grumpy. Jenkins was skeptical. Nobody could make 350 horsepower from a 283 with pump gas. He challenged Nicholson to a build-off. Each would build their best 283, and they'd be tested back-to-back on a dynamometer. The event drew hundreds of spectators and became known as the Frontiers Burlington Dyno Day. Jenkins's engine, built with unlimited budget, made 338 horsepower. Nicholson's $65 core engine made 351. Even Grumpy had to admit he'd been outsmarted, and in this validation from Jenkins launched Nicholson's professional career. Suddenly, everyone wanted a Heisch Dyno Donra engine. He went from building engines in his garage to running a full-scale performance shop. By 1963, he was campaigning a full factory-backed race team. By 1964, he was a household name in drag racing, all because he looked at a problem differently than everyone else. The technical specifications of that original 283 became the stuff of legend. Bore, 3.875 inches. Stroke, 3,000 inches. Rod ratio, 1:94:1. Combustion chamber volume, 58 cc. Intake valve diameter, 1.94 inches. Exhaust valve diameter, 1.50 inches. Compression ratio, 11.0:1. Maximum RPM, 7,500. Peak horsepower, 350 at 7,200 RPM. Peak torque, 290 lb-ft at 5,800 RPM. Every number represented a careful calculation, a deliberate choice based on physics rather than convention. The engine's reliability was perhaps most impressive. While big blocks were scattering parts after a season of racing, Nicholson's 283 ran for 2 full years without major failure. The only maintenance was valve adjustments and oil changes. This durability came from respecting the engine's limits while maximizing its capabilities. Nicholson never over-revved, never ran lean, never pushed beyond what his calculations said was safe. This discipline separated him from hot rodders who broke engines chasing that last horsepower. Modern engine builders still study Nicholson's 283 build because it represents perfect optimization within constraints. He couldn't change displacement, couldn't use exotic materials, couldn't access race gas. Every improvement had to work within these limitations. This forced creativity and deep understanding rather than brute force solutions. It's a masterclass in engineering efficiency that transcends its era. Titanin, the philosophical implications run deep. In an age of increasing specialization and corporate dominance, Nicholson's story reminds us that individual innovation still matters. That questioning authority isn't just rebellion, it's progress. That sometimes the experts are wrong, not because they're stupid, but because they're looking at the problem from the wrong angle. Nicholson didn't have more resources or better training than Chevrolet's engineers. He just asked different questions. And today, when we see 1,000 horsepower streetcars and 300 mph supercars, it's easy to forget that someone had to prove high specific output was possible. Someone had to show that fuel injection could support extreme performance. Someone had to demonstrate that small displacement didn't mean small power. That someone was a 17-year-old kid from Iowa with $65 and an idea that everyone said wouldn't work. The story of Don Nicholson's 283 is ultimately about potential, not just of an engine, but of human ingenuity. It's about looking at what everyone else dismisses and seeing opportunity. It's about applying intelligence and effort to overcome limitations. It's about proving that David can indeed beat Goliath, not through luck or divine intervention, but through superior strategy and flawless execution. This is what American hot rodding has always been about. Not just making things go fast, but doing it your way. Not just following instructions, but writing new ones. Not just accepting limitations, but shattering them. Nicholson's 283 wasn't just an engine. It was a declaration of independence from conventional thinking, a proof that innovation comes from individuals, not committees, and a reminder that sometimes the best solution is the one nobody else has tried. So the next time someone tells you something can't be done, remember that Iowa teenager who built a $65 engine that humiliated Detroit's finest. Remember that specifications are just numbers until someone proves they can be exceeded. Remember that every breakthrough starts with someone saying, "Mind what if I," instead of "Hoist." That's how it's always been done. What's the most impressive underdog build you've ever seen? Have you ever outsmarted the big guys with clever engineering instead of a big budget? Drop your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your own David-versus-Goliath moments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of hot rodding's greatest stories, make sure to subscribe. We're just getting started exploring the builds that changed everything. Until next time, keep questioning conventional wisdom and keep those engines singing.